This afternoon, I'm very excited to welcome Leila Mottley to celebrate the release of The Girls Who Grew Big. Adela Woods is 16 years old and pregnant. Her parents banish her from her comfortable upbringing in Indiana to her grandmother's home in the small town of Padua Beach, Florida. When she arrives, Adela meets Emory, who brings her newborn to high school, determined to graduate despite the odds. Simone, mother of 4-year-old twins, who weighs her options when she finds herself pregnant again, and the rest of the girls, a group of outcast young moms who raise their growing brood in the back of Simone's red truck. The town thinks the girls have lost their way, but really they're finding it, looking for love, making and breaking friendships, and navigating the miracle of motherhood and the paradox of girlhood. Full of heart and life and hope, set against the shifting sands of these friends' secrets and betrayals, The Girls Who Grew Big confirms Leila Mottley's promise and offers an explosive new perspective on what it means to be a young woman. Leila Mottley is the author of the novel Night Crawling, an Oprah's book club pick, and the New York Times bestseller, and the poetry collection Woke Up No Light. She is also the 2018 Oakland Youth Poet Laureate. She was born and raised in Oakland, where she continues to live. Mottley will be in conversation with Renee Bracey Sherman. Sherman is the co-author of Liberating Abortion, Claiming Our History, Sharing Our Stories, and Building the Reproductive Future We Deserve. Co-host of the podcast The A Files, A Secret History of Abortion, and the founder of We Testify, an organization dedicated to the leadership of people who have abortions. Please join me in welcoming Leila Mottley and Renee Bracey Sherman.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Awesome. We're going to start with a little reading.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I think that was explanation enough of the book, but I'm going to read a short section of Simone's section. There's not much you need to know going into it. Nobody ever warns you about the placenta. Like, you spend days seizing and stretching open to get some shoulders out your coochie, and then the baby, or babies in my case, are writhing in your arms and you realize it's not even over. You still gotta push out this pulsing purple heart, bigger than your man's head, and my man had a big-ass head, and find a way to cut the cords. I guess if you're in the hospital, then maybe somebody hands you a fancy pair of scissors to cut them, or mentions the placenta in between the choke of contractions to get that second baby out. But I gave birth set up in the bed of my boyfriend's red pickup truck, so I wouldn't know. I tell you I did it that way because I couldn't afford the hospital without no insurance, which was true. But really, I just didn't want people looking at me funny. Like, girl, what are you doing having a baby with this gangly man who keeps telling us to call him Tooth? I knew how it looked. I was 16. He was 22. But really, at the time, I didn't think it mattered any more than the birthmark on my ankle. And so I didn't want to have to explain to some nurse as I chewed ice that I love him. Have to say, they my babies, I wanted them, I want them. Even though at that point, I don't think I knew what I wanted or who I loved or how I ended up in the back of a pickup truck in Florida giving birth at 36 weeks. To tell you the truth, I didn't know much of nothing back then, sitting in that pickup truck staring at my placenta. How could I? Not because I was young, but because I was new. Like my newborn baby's skin so soft it seemed like they could tear open at any moment, I was just a fragile thing in a sharp world, like every other girl is before they meet themselves, before they meet their child and know what it means to be tethered. I already know y'all will take any chance you get to say we don't know what we're talking about. I've seen all the teen mom shows, but that's not what I'm saying. All those shows get made just to give y'all some white girls to laugh at, pity, and say they should have known better. But really, maybe you should have known better than to believe a camera is a mirror, or an ocean is a pool, or a mother is anything but a mother. You won't know till you know, and now I do. So that's going to make it even harder for you to understand why, 4.5 years after I gave birth in the back of a pickup truck, I found myself squatting in the ocean, pissing on another stick. I'll put it this way. Teen moms like Florida are the country's favorite scapegoat. Your favorite niece got addicted to fentanyl and is living with her boyfriend's grandpa? At least she's not a teen mom. You got laid off and have to move back to your parents' house in Colorado? At least it's not the hellhole they call Florida. Your daughter's a lesbian, but she's not pregnant. Got hate crimed, but it'd be worse than Florida. I'm from Florida, and I was 16 when I had my kids, so take it from me, it's not a golden walk down a yellow brick road or nothing. But we don't exist to calm your woes that at least your shitty life could be shittier. I love my kids. I spend my days rolled out in the sun in a little town called Padua Beach, and I wouldn't have it no other way. Or maybe I would, but wouldn't we all? Grass is always greener. Ocean looks so much bluer from far away.
Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to read the book yet. Yes, I love it so much. I read it in one sitting. I just truly just like sat through and did a mix of the audiobook and reading the book digitally. And I was just blown away with the way in which you have such depth to these characters who are young parents, teens, young folks of color, who are often people who are flattened in our society. And so I just want to say thank you for just the beauty. I became pregnant as a teen. I had an abortion, but a lot of my friends, especially teen activists, they were teen parent activists. I worked with them on the way in which society and even like the pro-choice movement shames them. And what you talked about in that end of that section that you read, that they are just so stigmatized. And so I want to say just thank you for how beautifully you put a multi-dimension to their story, and to Florida. I know Florida is always the butt of everyone's jokes, but you paint it so beautifully. So thank you for all of that. It is just so incredible of how you thoughtfully center these lives, the young parents in Florida Panhandle. And your first book, Night Crawling, which also, if you have not read, pick that one up today too. It is absolutely incredible. It focuses on a very real crisis in Oakland of police sex trafficking teen girls, particularly Black teens. And I also lived in Oakland as that was happening. And you talk about it from their perspective. And I think it's, again, a perspective that's like often forgotten about in the headlines. And in The Girls Who Grew Big, you focus on these teen girls, their lives and how they're scapegoated. And I want to just read a quick little quote that I thought was just like so perfect. I wasn't the first one, that's for sure. Young girls been having babies as long as there was babies to have, meaning forever. Not even 100 years ago, nobody would have batted an eye at me and my children, but things had changed. Somewhere along the walk of history, somebody decided we is a transgression to all things good and pure, and ever since then, despite the fact that there's less of us now than there was a decade ago, politicians and pastors and regular folks always talking about preventing teen pregnancy and poverty and sin all in the same boastful breath, and as though that's all we was. As though the pace our skin stretched and spotted defined our motherhood. And it's so beautiful. And I'm wondering if you can talk with the audience about why you decided to center this book on them and drop us into their lives for this story.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be talking to you specifically because I think this book can't exist without talking about abortion and reproductive justice and what it looks like for us to choose to not have children and to choose to have children and to receive the resources and support to make that possible. And I wish that your book had been out when I was researching it. It could have made my life a lot easier. So I decided to write this book for a lot of reasons. I'm a doula in my free time, so I have kind of an obsession with pregnancy and birth and parenthood, and through witnessing people kind of enter motherhood, I've gotten to be privy to the amount of scrutiny and judgment that kind of mothers in general experience that's only heightened for young parents. And I happen to work with a lot of young Black parents. And it is just poignant the way that our medical system treats young Black mothers, the way that our school systems treat families with young parents, our healthcare system, like in every way, it compounds how hard parenthood already is, and how isolating parenthood can be. And so I watch people enter parenthood, and our world really just does not cater to children or to parents. And I wanted to write this book about collectivism and about this group of young mothers who comes together and raises their children kind of together because of the shame that they've already had pressed on them. I think in some ways it is liberating for them. They already know how the world perceives them, how the world feels about them, and they kind of have to throw all of the rules of what parenthood looks like out because it wasn't created for them. And so that's kind of how it started. But I also am lucky to know and love a lot of young parents, and also the children of a lot of young parents. And it's a very specific experience to be raised and to raise someone when the world is telling you that the very fact of your parenthood is wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I think that collectivism is at the core of the story, and it's so beautiful in the way that your book is a mirror of actually how we can show up for one another in the middle of oppression. One of the other things that is sort of this core of the book is Padua Beach, right? This small town in Florida, and the tourists coming in, and it's really, that scene is so vital. Why did you pick Florida, and why now? Because you're from Oakland, and your last book took place in Oakland.
Yes.
Why Florida?
I wanted the setting to mirror the girls' experience in the world. And have any of you been to the Florida Panhandle? Okay, a couple. Great. So it's a very specific part of the country. I think when we think of Florida, we often think of Miami, Tampa, Orlando, retirement communities, beach towns, spring breakers, which is all part of what is true about this little place in the Panhandle, which in a lot of ways is marginalized in itself, geographically, culturally. In the South, they say that when you go north, you get south in Florida. And so basically, culturally, this part of Florida is the South. And so they're kind of experiencing some of the same segregation and rural life as people in Alabama, but with kind of the added pressures of being a place that people go to escape, to retreat. But along this, they call it the Forgotten Coast, there are also communities that once the spring breakers leave, there are people living their lives. And I think in a lot of ways it parallels and mirrors the girls' experience of being perceived as something kind of unimportant and undervalued, and making importance for yourself, and creating a life for yourself, whether or not it is visible or seen.
I love that. So it's making me think I was going to skip to a different question, but actually I'm going to go back to this one, because clearly you've done so much research, both on the location, right? That's just so evidenced by what you're saying right now, right? But overall, the research for the book is extensive. And there are a lot of storylines that absolutely mirror the data that we have about young parents and teens who become pregnant, and who seek abortions, including that they become impregnated by older men. And so I'm wondering, you talked a little bit about, your doula work. Can you get deeper in the research and sort of what brought you to make sure that what the data points and the narratives that you included?
Yeah, while I was writing, I was reading a lot, and I was reading a lot of nonfiction about teen pregnancy. I mean, there's not actually a lot of good books out there, especially modern books, and our relationship to young parents and pregnancy has changed a lot over the past 20, 25 years. And so I read a book called On Teen pregnancy, and that is a like academic book. You like can't even get it in a bookstore. That was really helpful with kind of like foundational data. And then I read fiction also, and reread fiction that represented young mothers. Some of the ones are Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward, Red at the Bone, Jacqueline Woodson, With the Fire on High, Elizabeth Acevedo. So I did look at kind of what has the canon created already here. And then I also like rewatched, I grew up watching Teen Mom and 16 and Pregnant, and I rewatched a lot of other representations of young parenthood in the media. And it's really interesting. We have like Juno and Gilmore Girls and a lot of representations of white young parents who end up either like we never see them actively parenting. There's no parenting involved. And then we have a weird cultural relationship to young parenthood and pregnancy where there's like simultaneously a disgust and a shame while also like a fascination and this weird fetishy relationship with young parents and specifically with teen pregnancy. And so I did a lot of like a cultural review and study. And then a lot of this book is like based in reproductive justice, and so I read a lot of Loretta Ross and did a lot of kind of foundational research, also oral histories of like enslaved women's experience with like reproductive choice and agency and herbal abortions. I did a lot of research to try to get there. Yeah, so much. And then Florida itself too, figuring out like what does this look like and feel like geographically, what are the plants there, like all of that.
I can say you got the oral abortion so well. It's a lot of times self-managed abortion is very stigmatized, and so I just want to say thank you.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
doing
it's
that
stigmatized
so well and so
even
thoughtfully.
in like birth work communities. We have this idea that like the only way you can receive an abortion is through a medication or surgical abortion, and I really wanted this book to be a representation of young girls who are making a way for themselves when things feel completely impossible. And part of that was them taking control of their own reproductive rights and choices and seeing that there weren't options in making them. But it was difficult because if you look up herbal abortions, they say don't do it. Like the first 5 pages of Google search results is like, just don't do that, which I think is entirely unhelpful because if you are looking there, then the need is so high that the risk feels worth it, right? And we need to know what self-managed and herbal abortions look like because people aren't going to have less of them because we say don't do it. They're just going to not have as safe or regulated options.
Yeah, spoiler alert, there's an abortion in the book, guys. We won't tell you who. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that when I decided to write about that in my book, it was like, there is this idea that it's something that we shouldn't talk about or don't give out the recipe. Right. But one, people have been having abortions for 6,500 years. We did give out a couple recipes in our book, and we were like, they don't really work. Of course, our publisher was like, let's put a disclaimer in the beginning of the book. But I think, we always say in the community, it's like the best abortion that you can get is the best abortion that you can get. Right. It's whatever you have access to. And I think you show so clearly what the girls are dealing with in a situation and why someone might make that decision. So I love it. We've both mentioned reproductive justice a couple times. And so the book really centers the concept of reproductive justice and queerness. And so for folks in the audience who may not have heard that term before or just need a refresher on the definition, it is a framework that was created by 12 Black activists 30 years ago in 1994. And it is about the right to have a child, the right to not have a child, and the right to be able to parent your children in safe and sustainable communities, and the right to our bodily autonomy. And that differs from the pro-choice movement that's sort of focused on have a kid, not have a kid. And it's very rights-based. And reproductive justice really centers those histories that you were talking about of reproductive oppression and making sure that folks of color in certain communities don't have everything that they need to be able to parent, which we see with teens. And I wanted to know, like, this book is very much about finding oneself and queerness and bodily autonomy. And I'm wondering, like, why you really wanted to center it in that, but also particularly in this moment. And again, you've talked a little bit about why teens, but like in the pro-choice movement and definitely the anti-abortion movement, like teens who become pregnant are like, let's hide them away. But you really shine a spotlight on them using reproductive justice. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I think the way we've been taught to think about teen parents is like creates an idea of a moral issue. And I kind of wanted to remove the idea of like moralism as having anything to do with this, but also like it's not necessarily an issue at all, right? People have sex, teens get pregnant, and teens become parents. Like that happens, and it has happened forever, and it probably will happen forever. And I think as we see like declining rates in teen pregnancies, we have this idea, or we're taught that that means that we've done something good, which then I think places even more pressure and stigma and shame on young people who are having children, because we don't have models of what that looks like. And even like motherhood spaces are really not built, shaped, or welcoming to young parents. And I see that a lot. And I think like, as I think about having my own kids in the Bay Area, if you're under 30 and you have kids, you're a teen parent. And so I like have thought a lot about what does it look like to parent within shame and to kind of remove shame from parenthood, because I think it is, I mean, we hear about mom guilt all the time, right? So much of that is based in like, there is no right or wrong way. And we're taught that every choice parents make, specifically mothers make, is wrong, from how you feed your baby, how you get your baby to sleep, how you birth, all of these things, right? And the amount of shame that exists, I think, is partially because we aren't given a like big lexicon or spectrum of what being a good parent looks like, especially for young parents. And so I wanted these girls to get to be their own versions of what a good parent looks like. And I think they're kind of finding their way into that because there is no model or guide.
Yeah, think about the times that you've seen in the news where they talk about like, oh, the teen pregnancy rate is dropping, and that's a sign of our nation going in a good direction.
Yeah, it was part of Obama's campaign.
It was huge.
Yeah,
it was huge, and it's considered this like bipartisan issue. And imagine what that feels like to be a teen parent. That your existence is a sign that the country is doing badly, poorly, instead of like, I don't know, capitalism or racism.
Yeah, and like I think that we have this idea that like young parents aren't doing well if they need help, but the reality is actually like all parents need help, and parenthood is isolating and requires community in order for it to be sustainable, and for parents to thrive. And I think with these girls, like they're entering parenthood with very little support outside of each other. And I wanted us to kind of question our own understanding or views of young parenthood, and also of like what good parenthood looks like. And that goes for both these girls, but also their parents, and then the way that they treat their own children.
So going on this theme of like what good parenthood looks like, I think we as a society tie good parenthood to having money. And class is such a deep issue in this book, particularly class and race. And one of the three main characters, Adela, is a biracial teen swimmer who becomes pregnant, and her parents send her to Padua Beach to live with her Black grandmother during her pregnancy. And so she's hidden away. Immediately, she holds a lot of judgment about the other residents in the area. But also the girls, based particularly on their class. And I would argue, as a biracial person myself, I think there is a bit of biracial exceptionality there. And And I think as a society, classness or classlessness actually is hurled at young parents. Because of it, it is a function of poverty and lack of access to resources, finances, and often the familial supports. So do you want to talk about how class functions in this narrative and how it shaped the characters and your thinking for the story arc?
Yeah, I wanted us to see girls of different classes and races within parenthood, not because necessarily, like, we know the statistics, right? We know that more Black and Latino women are young parents, but I think we think of that as a failing and not also cultural. There are a lot of reasons to have kids young, and in a lot of spaces, like, that means that you have grandparents who are young and can help you out. You know, like, there are a lot of reasons that people choose to have kids young, and I wanted us to see a variety of girls in different spaces, because we need to, like, kind of remove the idea of, like, one image of what a young parent looks like, but their motherhood and the access that they have is very much racialized and defined by class. And we see Adela, she comes in, she has a lot of ideas of what the South is like, she has a lot of ideas of what good Blackness looks like, and parenthood, and especially, like, judgments on these young parents, and doesn't identify herself with them. And I think her journey into figuring out, like, does she want to be a parent and what does that look like for her, is also about reckoning with her preconceived notions of what young parents are and what they look like and how they are allowed to function, and then specifically how she is allowed to function coming from a place where teen parenthood is a failing, and her parents don't want to be perceived as associated with it, and so they remove her from it. This actually came because my dad was telling me a story. He's from, he grew up in the 60s in Detroit, and he was telling me a story about how he used to, like, you know, be at a family party or at church, and there would be, like, a teenage girl from his school, and she'd just be gone, and he'd ask his mom, like, hey, where'd she go? And his mom would go, oh, she went down south. And down south essentially meant, oh, she got pregnant, left, she'll be back next year, not pregnant. And this is a phenomenon that I think we don't see as often anymore, but the idea of, like, shame and removal and distancing is very much related to our idea of, like, the way we want to be perceived, and then also our families and the people who love us and the way they want to be perceived. And so class very much informs that for Adela, and I think also race. She is raised by a white mother and a Black father who have kind of attempted to achieve whiteness and done so through wealth, and who view the South as this kind of other place, and have taught their daughter to do so as well, until she goes there and kind of realizes her perceptions were inaccurate and narrow.
It's making me think also just the way in which, as young parents, they're on their own, because in different ways their own parents are, as a result of them becoming pregnant, withholding love, and that is a punishment for not only having sex but becoming pregnant and then continuing that pregnancy and becoming parents. And the way in which you show them parenting with love without being loved themselves. I don't know. Can you talk about that? That just, like, as you were talking, it made me think, like, it's just, that's really, really difficult. And I think you conveyed it really well, and the complications of that.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly difficult for each of them, because this is the first time they're essentially independent, and they're thrust into independence, and have to figure out not only how do I be my own person, but then how do I care for another one. And I think a lot of them struggle because they only have one representation of what it looks like to parent, that they have to figure out if they're okay with that, and if they're okay with the way that they were raised. And I think parenthood in a lot of ways makes us reflect on our own childhoods. And I think one thing that's special about young parents is that childhood wasn't that long ago, right? And so in a lot of ways, they understand the feeling of powerlessness that their children experience, and also like what it feels like to have your parents mess up and not be accountable for it. And so I think in a lot of ways, their attempts to parent well are in a recognition of when they don't. And when they mess up, they recognize it and they try to fix it. And I think pride can sometimes be so tied to parenthood, that our children are a representation of us, right? And I think a lot of parents struggle with what that means about them and a deflection then. And so I think these girls are attempting to not do that while also feeling all of the emotions of parenthood come up, and also being teenagers who want things and who have desires and dreams and their own lives and things that they're being consumed by. And I think it's important to remember that they are young girls and they are allowed to mess up, and we need to like give them that grace while also recognizing that in their parenthood they are attempting to center their children, and that's the whole point.
Yeah, that their mess up as a parent is not a failure because of their age. It's just because parents mess up.
Right. Right. It's so true. It's so true. I think every young parent I've talked to has said, like, I don't regret my children, but I wouldn't recommend having a child as a teenager. And I love my kid, but I wish that I knew what I know now when they were born, when they were young. And I think that that's true also of parents in general. There are things that we just can't know until we know. And you learn through parenting. And I think a lot of these girls, like we see Simone, she has 4-year-olds. She has a little more hindsight than the other girls, and we see the ways that she's able to reflect and do a little differently than maybe the girls who are in the thick of it.
Absolutely. And she's really just like anchoring that collectiveness and that collective learning, which is so beautiful. So I'm going to ask one more question and then we will move to audience questions. So if you have one, get ready to ask. And the mic is over here behind this white pole on the front side. So you'll come to the mic and ask the question. So you can line up as you're thinking about it. But the one I wanted to ask is like writing a book has so many highs and lows. And I feel like I learned so much more than I already knew about reproductive justice and also myself when I was writing my book in that process. What's something that you feel like you learned deeper about reproductive justice, and what's something that you learned about yourself during the book writing process?
Before I wrote this book, I had written like 4 or 5 other books between Nightcrawling and this one, and I kind of got in my head about it, going from like writing books when I had no reader before and the kind of sacredness of getting to write without a reader to knowing someone, even just my agent, was going to read the book. And so I kept kind of like stumbling and feeling like it wasn't clicking and I wasn't having fun. And I started this book to have fun and to write about something I was interested in. And I think that part of what I learned is like having a good time, having a book that is joyful and exciting and free doesn't mean that it doesn't contend with issues in our world. It means that it allows space for all of it at once. And then with reproductive, I mean, I learned so much, especially about abortion in the time that I was writing this book. I also, was supporting my first abortions and some of really complicated births, and it was a learning experience for me to go from the very active work of supporting pregnant and birthing people to this really reflective work of going and what are all of the things that go into that, right? And I think I learned a lot about laws, a lot about policy, especially in Florida. The policy around abortion changed 4 times over the course of writing this book, so it was constantly having to catch up and rewrite. And so it went from a 15-week abortion ban to a 6-week abortion ban, and that changed so much of what this book became. But I think it also reminded me that like a lot of us like aren't keeping up unless we're in it, right? Unless we need to, and has definitely pushed me to kind of try to stay as on top of the laws and policies beyond just like the timeline in which you can get an abortion, but also like things that I think we don't talk about as often. Like in Florida, you need 2 appointments 24 hours apart in order to receive medication to self-manage an abortion at home. And that, like what goes into that is so complicated. And for these girls, they're 3 hours from the closest abortion clinic. And you have to think about like childcare, gas money, how are you gonna go back 24 hours later, all of these things that I think I hadn't quite considered when thinking about abortion law and policy.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's open it up for questions. The mic is right here.
I know people feel really shy about the mic. I promise it's going to be okay. If you need to just raise your hand, we can also repeat the question.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, hi. Okay. So I think you do an incredible job of just depicting these young girls who are othered, not only in The Girls Who Grew Big, but also in Night Crawling. Kiara is, forced into sex trafficking and is just trying to take care of her brother. And these are young women who are poor, who are Black, who are just othered by society. So what would you say is the overall message that you want your readers to take about othered young women?
I think that like we rarely think of ourselves as others, right? I think a lot of people read my books and are like, this is really sad. And I'm like, I think very few of us perceive ourselves as tragic or sad or and I think that we have more room to believe deeper in people, particularly in Black girls, and that there is more going on than like the list of things that have been done to us. Thank you. Don't be shy.
Come on up here. Yes, come on.
Yes, the book is so good. I had a question because you tell the story from the 3 different characters. Did you start out telling it that way from the 3 different perspectives, or how did that develop, and why did you decide to do it that way?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, I started with 3 first-person POVs. That was like my challenge to myself, was figuring out how to create 3 really distinct voices, all told through first person and all girls in similar circumstances. A lot of the work that I did to get there was in kind of thinking about how they would perceive and process their world, and so what was their foundational references, what did they know and believe and use to kind of compare and understand their experience. So that was like initially how I started. I knew there were 3 of them. It was important to me that we see a spectrum of what young mothers look like and can look like. It was a challenge for me because I wanted to include every type of birth and all of the pregnancy complications and like all of these things that they could be and all different ages of children. And at the end of the day, these are like 3 very distinct people going through 3 very specific experiences and stages of parenthood and pregnancy. And I did do a lot of work in revision to kind of make sure their voices were as singular as possible. And so we kind of see different their backgrounds in their voices, but we also see that they will have different sentence structures, or Emory uses a lot of old Southern sayings, because she was raised by her grandparents in Florida. So there are little things that are specific to each of the girls, and that was a lot of the writing process. I think the collective favorite is Simone, but I also think Simone is the one who's like, she's carrying the rest of them. She's older. She has a lot more perspective and hindsight. And so I think she's the easiest to kind of understand and love. But I think it's important to remember with the other ones that they're still in the middle.
Other questions? I can ask one while someone comes up with one. To this point about the 3 point of views, obviously you should all buy the book today. And if you do like I do, sometimes I listen to the audiobook and read a book like I'm 4. And you ever heard the books, the little read-alongs? I still do that sometimes, and it's fun. And I'll switch between formats. And the audiobook is incredible. Like, it's absolutely incredible because it's 3 different readers and voice actors, and the way in which, when you were talking about like the sentence structure of Emory, like that comes out, those phrases, all the different voices, they're not just literal different voices, but you can hear the care that you put into the way that you wrote their voices in it. And I think that's so beautiful. And I guess I'm wondering, did they always like envision that it would be 3 different voice actors? What was that process like?
I'm so happy to hear it's good because I haven't listened to it yet. But
So good.
so good. It was actually what I was pushing for from the beginning. I really wanted 3 narrators. I was like, one cannot do this. And they finally agreed. They do audiobooks really kind of late. It's so funny. They're like 2-3 months before.
There's
the
a
book
moment
comes
where
out.
you're like, is this going to get done before the
it's so
book?
funny. And so the producers and the directors, they send like audition tapes, and it was important to me that each girl feels like young, but that they're like correctly aged. And so she's 16, she's the youngest, and the voice actor sounds kind of like the youngest. She was pretty easy to do. Simone's, like, the minute I heard A Dream, I was like, yeah, that's it. And then Emory was really hard. There were like 6 voice actors, and I had them do it again because the Southern accent was really thick because none of the voice actors were actually Southern or from this particular part of the South. And it's a really specific regional accent. And they're also teenage girls, which means they have access to the internet. So they're not going to sound as Southern as maybe if they were from an older generation. And so we like worked really hard to get the right balance of Southern. And ended up with like these 3 incredible narrators. Yeah, so I'm really happy about it.
It's wonderful. I hope you take some time to listen to it because it's so
I
good.
will. I'm excited. Yeah.
Okay, did they give you time to think of a question? Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, so I'm more familiar with your poetry collection, Woke Up No Lie, that I read coming over here. I haven't gotten a chance to read any of your novels yet, but I'm excited to read because I love when people who have previously put out like poetry collections and writing novels, great examples we can talk about. But what my question is, a lot of times what I see with a lot of authors in their debut novels, they'll talk about places that they're originally from, which Night Crawling is in, set in Oakland. I guess it's kind of like 2 questions. What does the research process look like for depicting a place that you're not necessarily from or have too much of a connection to? I don't know if you have any connection to that region of Florida. And also, what were some of the questions what were some of the anxieties that you had in tackling a region that you might not necessarily have like that strong of a connection as some place that you're from?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's a great question. So my sister's from Florida. So I've been to Florida a few times, but I had only been like below the Panhandle. Yeah. Oh, cool. So I'd been to Miami, to West Palm Beach, Boca Raton. I'd been across to Tampa. I'd been to all of those places, and I'd been to like Georgia, but it's all really different from the Panhandle. And so I started writing this book. I knew it had to be set in the Panhandle, both because of kind of the mirroring of the culture and these girls' experience, but also because Adela is an elite swimmer, but she's from a landlocked state. So when she comes to Florida, this is her first time seeing the ocean, and kind of she's thrust into this whole other world. And it was important to me that like that be a huge part of her experience experience and be paralleled to her experience in this town. So that's why I ended up setting it there, but I'd never been there. And I started writing the first third of the book before I went, and then I went on a research trip to the Panhandle, and I drove like across all around the Panhandle. And when I went back, I had to like completely rewrite the whole thing because there was just so much that I didn't know. And I think it's interesting because like as authors, we have both like, I think as writers, we like to explore other places and other things, but there's also an expectation that like you can't know things and places and people that you haven't experienced. And so I think it's part of like the author's due diligence to get as close as you possibly can without like being from a place. And so that was a lot of the work that I did was from afar, Google Maps. I used a lot of like Google Earth and reading a lot of books about this specific region in Florida, also about like just the history of the Panhandle, but none of that compared to physically being in the place. So when I'm on a research trip, I am like usually out and walking around, listening to people. We ended up like just parking and walking into the forest, and then we ran into this guy who was like, he's wearing jeans, and he was like, hey, you shouldn't be in here, there are snakes. And so little experiences like that where you kind of like get a feel of the place, listening to the regional accent, listening to the conversations people have. Like I touch a lot of things, so like I'll touch plants and the ground and like try to figure out the texture of the place as much as I possibly can. And then there's a lot of like note taking and trying to breathe it and experience it. I also did talk to some young mothers from the South and from like the Gulf of Mexico area of the South, to kind of get a more regional experience of young parenthood, because I do think it differs region to region. So yeah, that's some of the work I did.
Another question. I can do a filler one while you're thinking. Okay. All right.
Just following up on that, do you get tempted when you're doing your research trips to put Snake's Guy in the book as like a minor character because you have that direct connection, or does that get squirrely?
I think sometimes I get tempted, and sometimes I do. There are like little things that will end up in there. Usually it takes time. I try to like come up with my own things first. That will probably end up 10 years from now seeping into my subconscious. So I see things like that happen. And same for night crawling. Like I'm from the place, so I wasn't doing active like research, but there are things in my life that I would then experience and internalize, and then they'd show up in the book and I wouldn't even realize until someone I know read the book and we were like, oh, is that who that's supposed to be? I feel like not intentionally. So I think things like that happen more where it goes into my subconscious when I'm actively writing. I usually am not pulling from that, but there are probably little things, yeah.
Cool, good answer. Thank you.
Awesome. Another question, or am I doing my filler question? All right. Yes.
So in your research about reproductive justice and teen parenthood, was there something that you wanted to include but you didn't get to in the book?
Yeah, there was so much. I wanted to like include a lot of the things about like that make teen pregnancy and birth slightly different, or can. I think I included Emory has preeclampsia, I think, but like there's no preterm birth. I wanted to have like midwives and doulas, but actually that wasn't accurate to the setting in the rural South. They would have had to have their own like independent midwife, and that is expensive and all kinds of other barriers. So there were things like that that I really wanted to include. I talked to a lot of mothers and young mothers and their children, both like people I know and love who I don't think I'd ever sat down and had those like active conversations with. So hearing them reflect it to me was so different than just like watching and knowing. And I think balancing the idea of regret and trying to figure out like how to include a lot of different experiences and trajectories of young parenthood. I wanted to include a lot more, and at points I had other girls in the group that were more important and had kind of more of their own storylines, but it ended up getting really complicated and messy. So I had to tone it back. Yeah, I think that's some of the things. But there's always things I want to include. But especially with a book that already has a lot of characters, it was important for me to pull back.
I love that. All right, I'll ask one. You do have a background in poetry, and I think the writing in this book, in both your books, is, I mean, it's poetic, it's for lack of a better term. Can you talk about how you go from writing poetry to writing a novel, and how you feel like your poetry shows up in this different format in these novels?
Yeah, I mean, I was writing novels at the same time as I was doing poetry. So for me, they're like two really separate art forms. And one didn't necessarily precede the other. And so in my work, like, I know that poetry fuses itself into it, but I don't necessarily like think of it as being informed by poetry. I read poetry, and I like grew up reading poetry and then reading novels by poets, and so I like really value lyricism, and that definitely I think influences the way that I write. But I don't really actively write poetry anymore, except maybe like in my journal. But
That sounds active.
like once a year, I'll be like,
That's more than I do, so that's active.
Okay, fair enough. So most of the time, I feel like fiction fulfills the role of both, and I think that as I like get deeper into different books, there are ways that like I will pull back on poetry, or I'll end up with adding more. And part of this book was allowing some of the characters to have kind of more poetry and more of a feel of poetry in their voices than others. So I'm kind of figuring out like how I can shift in or out of that.
That's awesome. All right, we have time for one more question. I was like, I know somebody's got a question out there. You've just been sitting here waiting for the final. Come on.
Well, it's not really a question. It's just really gratitude. I can't wait to read this book. And I feel like wherever you are as a mother, there is weird shame and judgment. It's so weird how every single person feels like, oh, you're too old. Oh, you're too young. Or you're too poor. You're too rich. I don't know. Anyway, so I love how you were talking about how like, okay, you're judgmental about this. I'll make it more. I'll make it more. I'll make it more. And that you've just gone for that, and also brought in, and there's love, and there's wanting, and then do you ever think about that? So I've been reading a lot of books. I am a writer, and I've been reading also Night Bitch and The Possibilities, and you know, to say out loud, yeah, why does a friend of mine today was just saying her baby was born jaundiced, and she had her husband sneak herself back into her apartment when she came back from the hospital without the baby. And I said, what? And she said, well, I was ashamed. I was ashamed to come home without a baby. And I thought, this is just crazy. So anyway, thanks. I'm looking forward to it so much.
I love that. Any last questions, compliments, celebrations? We'll take those too. While someone's thinking of the last one, I just want to say that, you know, you've written an incredible book. I hope you are so, so proud. The moment I read Night Crawling, I was like, when is her next book out? I just want to read everything. And, you know, and then you said this was coming out, and just the topic. I mean, it meant a lot to me personally, but to be able to read it and just see how beautifully you capture people's lives and their humanity. And I don't know, to me, it's just the best of what a novel can do, and really reflect our lives and not make people caricatures, but show them and their complexity with love and joy and all of the feelings, and help others understand this is what their life is like. And here's how we actually can show up as bitter humans for them. Here's how we can show up as better humans towards teen parents, folks who become pregnant as teens, folks who are exploring their queerness, folks who are exploring motherhood, all of that. And it's so beautiful. And the book just feels like such a warm hug. And the cover is really beautiful. I don't know if you want to talk about that for just a second, because
we can talk about it.
I judge books by their cover. I was obsessed with, I just basically art directed the fuck out of my book because I was obsessed. And yours is so beautiful. Please talk about how that came to be.
This cover was such a process. We went through about 12 before we got here, which is really different than night crawling, where that was like one of the first ones that they showed me and felt like right. Like I didn't have an exact picture of what it was going to look like, but I knew it when I saw it. And that was not the case with this one. It was important to me that the image feel like it respects young parents and pregnancy and treats young parents with dignity. And that was surprisingly hard to find. I mean, if you Google like stock photos of young moms, it's not looking great.
Don't.
Yeah. So, and that's what designers use. So it was a challenge to get to a cover, and my wife ended up finding this artist. Her name's Ashley January, and she does paintings of Black mothers and specifically like Black maternal mortality. And this is her painting. It's self-portrait at 34 weeks, and it just like was perfect. And my publisher thankfully said yes.
Awesome. Last question. Okay, I will ask it. What do you want folks to take away from reading this book, or even just from this conversation today?
I think that a lot of what I want people to take away is that we need to show up better for parents and for mothers, and that community care is something that we have removed from our culture around how we treat parents. I watch so many parents have the people in their lives like kind of treat them like at an arm's distance, or even show up to hold the baby and not much else. And it's so important that we meet mothers where they're at without judgment, and recognize how isolating it is in those early days. And I think also just shift our ideas around young parents, and show up for young people in general, respect young people, and give mothers more of our love and attention, and be a little more creative in the way that we care for them.
I love that. Please give it up for Leila and the girls who grew big.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.